This video is going to be about sharing files among user accounts of a local Linux machine, of a single Linux computer. If you've got multiple accounts and you want to share files across those, have certain files that are shared, or being able to send files from one account to the other, that's what this video is about. If you want to talk about network sharing, I have a different video about that. It's in my web development series. Talks about file sharing protocols and the file transfer protocols. I'm going to touch on it briefly here, but I'm not really going to go into very much detail at all. But this is really going to be focusing on sharing them among a single computer. And why would you want multiple accounts on a computer? Maybe you have multiple users, or maybe you have multiple projects. Multiple projects, you really got to think about that concept. Do you really want multiple accounts? Multiple accounts gives you very good security and privacy between your projects. So if you're worried about someone getting in unauthorized, let's say you're trying to run a program for some company, maybe you're doing cryptocurrency mining, and you don't really trust the mining program, or you're working for some other company and you don't really trust their software. You don't want them to be able to get in and delete your family pictures or your own project stuff. Or maybe you're running some other programs that you wrote and you don't really trust what they're going to do yet. So you're going to set up your own account, a separate account, and be able to work with that. But maybe you're constantly downloading these cool files where you've typed up some notes, maybe from one of my videos, that you want to incorporate in some of your own files. And you want to be able to send those to those accounts where you need them. Well, Linux file system permissions give you a lot of trouble with that. They by default, you're set up as the owner which created them. The creator is typically the owner, and root can change the owner of a file. But you oftentimes, well, you can't change the owner. You might be able to change it between other groups you have permissions on, to be able to do a ch group, possibly. I haven't really tried that too much, but that might be a possibility. But the thing is commonly it's set up to where everyone can read a file, but not everyone else can write it. So let's say you created a file because you were browsing the internet, you took some notes, you saved that file, and even if you were able to move it to another account, it's still owned by you, which means if you wanted to, or that owner of that account wanted to edit that and then try and save it, they'd have to save it as something else. They can't overwrite it. And you can't really put it directly into their folders because you don't own their folders and you don't have write permission on their folders. The second one is the reason for that. You don't have write permission there. So how do we get around these real pain problems here if you're trying to move files and share files among your different user accounts? Well, let's take a look at some of those options. One of them is, if you're dealing with it one at a time, this is a time-consuming pain process, but to manually edit the file, going in as root to change the owner, user permissions, possibly just opening it up to where it's a shared file. That's not so secure a lot of times, going in as root, all that, especially for every single time. You want to minimize your access with root, because root has access to everything. If something goes wrong in root, even accidentally, your entire system may become unusable, and it might become unrecoverable as well. So you want to be careful with the root account. You want to minimize access in your root account. User permissions, setting it to where everyone has access, could be a little bit of a problem. Perhaps making sure that each of those users that will be sharing that are a part of the same group, and setting your group permissions. That would be another option. Another thing that you could do is to use the network system, such as file sharing. There are good file sharing systems in Linux. File transfer protocols, email attachments, and file uploads, stuff like that. That can be a pain, especially if you're dealing with a whole bunch of programs. Let's say you downloaded something, let's say it's some source code. You downloaded some source code in your main account, and now you want to send it to your test program account, let's just say. That's a lot of files. You're either going to have to zip everything back up to move it on over there if you happen to have just continued to work on that and work on that, but before you really want to run it, you want to move it on over there, you've got several hundred files. You want to zip it and then upload it to something where you can download it and then unzip it. That's a little bit not as efficient as just moving files. So that's something else. And that's also a lot of extra overhead. You got to set up the accounts. You got to set up the servers and the clients and get everything to where it's working. Configure those servers to where you can use them. So that's a big hassle there. Another one that's also a little bit of a hassle, but it could work, and it could actually be a very secure and efficient way of doing it, is to use a sender program. A sender program is a program where you can well, let's just take a quick look at over here. This would be a program that you could put it in your path. This needs to be put in the sender's path, where whoever's sending the file needs to have a program similar to this. Now, normally these programs, the CP and the MV over here, this is for copy command and this is the move command, and a lot of times those are owned by root. Those are programs that are owned by root, but you have permission to execute them, which means that they're going to execute as your user, which is why you're not going to be able to just CP this straight into their home directory, because you don't have permission there and it's trying to do that action as your user. Or even with the MV command, the move command. Either one of those, same issue applies. This is going to run as whoever is running by default. All of these are going to run as whoever is running this program here. And these individual programs, unless they have a run as owner permission, then they will run as whoever's running this file. Now, if this file has run as owner permissions, then that could be done differently. And that's the reason why I'm saying, if you put this file into something which you have a path for, or maybe even everyone has a path for it, but probably just the sender has it in their path, such as, you know, your home directory, bin directory, and then you could go in as root once and change the owner of this file once it's been created. Make sure it has execute permissions. Make sure its owner is the receiving file, is wherever who's going to be receiving that file. Make sure that's the receiving account that owns this, and make sure it has run as owner permissions. And then you exit root, and now you have a command that whenever you run this, it's going to run not as the sender, not as root, but as the receiver, and therefore it should have, most files are created with read permissions. So it will have read permissions to be able to start the copy, and it will have write permissions as it is then running as the owner of the account where it's being received. So it can then write it there, and then the new file that's been created is also owned by the receiver. So they can open it, they can save it, they can do whatever they want to with it. This is one file at a time as well. And yes, it's a little bit of a process to set this up. So this is not as great of as the options as the other options are going to be here. So that's one option as well. Using a sender program is probably one of the most secure, because if you wanted to go in there, you could write more than just a shell script. You could write something that doesn't need to see anything over there at all and will avoid collisions with any other files, even sort out based on the type of the file. You could do all kinds of things based on that program. But the main thing is make sure it's owned by the receiver in the path of the sender, and it's executable and has run as receiving accounts permissions. So that's an option. One of the best options, though, is down over here with attach a shared or removable drive. On my case, I'm with a laptop, so I don't really have multiple drive bays. But if you're working on a tower or something that has the ability to install multiple hard drives, the shared drive is an absolutely awesome idea, especially for an older drive. Get one of those older drives that only stores 1 to 2 gigs, and it's golden. Formatted as FAT32. Set up your system to where it mounts it as root, with everyone having permission to read and write to that drive. So that way, no one's just got just my permissions to access it. Everyone can access that mount. And as long as it's FAT32, then what happens is, when you move a file onto that shared drive, FAT32 does not recognize users, groups, or any of those Linux permissions. So it strips all those. It has no permissions. As long as you have permission to copy it to there, as long as you can access that drive and access the file, you can copy it onto that drive. Then, when you go to pull it back off by the receiving account, then you can, they will assign those permissions to whoever's receiving that, to whoever is bringing that into their file system, because now they're creating the file on their system. So it just moved the permissions over. That's one way to do that. And that can be done with bulk. That can be done, area select a whole pile of files and just move them all over. That's an excellent way of doing that. But a removable drive can work in a similar way. That's just more, you're going to mount it as the individual user, and then you're going to have to unmount it, go over to the other user account, remount it, and then move it on over. So it's not as efficient as having an attached shared file that's automatically mounted by root at boot. Everyone has permission to it, and then you can also create a shortcut to that on each of the user's desktops that needs access to that. So that's one configuration that would really work pretty well with that. Another way is specially configured folders. Specially configured folders is something that we can do. So what we're going to take a look at here is we can go on in and create a folder that we want to call it as the inbound receiving folder. And so we're going to create a folder there. And then we want to make sure that our permissions are set up for that. And for this, we could mark it as sticky if we're really concerned about people deleting from it, if we really want to make sure it's just write only or whatever. But we can make these permissions as we need them, to where this is a public folder. Other people have permission to write, because by default, nobody has permission to write to any of your folders. So it can be set up to where you have access in, to where I can do the, you need the run as group permissions on this folder. So that way you make sure it's in your group and you have access to it that way. And then you just figure out, what do you want as far as the owner? What do you want as far as anyone in this group, and what do you want for everything else? I want everyone to be able to dump on into this, but the reason why I need the run as group permission is I want to be able to have it be mine once I get it. So I'm going to go ahead and mark that, and then I'm going to mark that inbound directory. Now I now have very special permissions set on that, which means anybody can browse on into this folder here and drop me a file, and I can pull it on out and copy it to wherever else I want it to be, or even work with it right where it is. But those are all options that I can work with on that file, and I can really make sure here that this is a special I can make sure that this has a very special permissions on it that is exactly what I need for my application, and has a group that is also, make sure that my group is set to whatever I want that to be. Maybe I want to use a shared group that everyone else is using, or maybe I just want it to be my own group. But I can set that in there, so now once they send it to me, I have access to that, and I can work with that at that point. Thank you for watching.